The phone in my trembling hands displayed a video I never expected to see. My son David's face filled the screen, and his voice cut through me like glass. "Mom, don't trust her. Take care of the children if something happens to me." The silence in my living room became deafening, and something inside me shattered completely. Can you imagine receiving a message like that from your own child? What would you do if the person you loved most in the world left you a warning that would change everything you believed? I stared at that screen in complete shock, but I already knew that the next day, my call to the police would forever alter the fate of my family. But before I continue, take a quick look to make sure you're still subscribed. I don't want you to miss any of these eye-opening stories. My name is Marianne Rutherford. I'm 67 years old, and for 38 years, I was a high school librarian. I raised my son David with all the love in the world after his father passed away when he was just 12. I worked double shifts, gave up weekend trips, and saved every penny so he could go to college. David grew up to be a wonderful man, married Sarah 5 years ago, and blessed me with 2 beautiful grandchildren, Emma, who's 7, and little Tommy, who just turned 4. I thought our family was complete, happy, and safe. The accident happened on a Tuesday evening. David was driving home from work when his car skidded on the wet road and crashed into a tree. The paramedics said he died instantly. At the hospital, they handed me his personal belongings in a plastic bag, his wallet, his wedding ring, and his phone. That's when I discovered the video he'd recorded just 20 minutes before the crash. The recording was shaky, filmed inside his car. David looked nervous, constantly checking his mirrors. His voice was urgent, almost desperate. "Mom, I know this sounds crazy, but I need you to know something about Sarah. I found things, documents, messages. She's not who we think she is. If something happens to me, please, please take care of Emma and Tommy. Don't let her take them away from us." But there was something else that didn't fit. In the background of the video, I could hear another voice, a woman's voice, saying something I couldn't quite make out. Sarah had told us she was at her book club that evening, but that voice sounded familiar. Too familiar. The next morning, when I showed up at David's house for the funeral arrangements, Sarah's reaction to seeing me was strange. She seemed startled, almost frightened. Her eyes immediately went to the phone in my hands, and I noticed her fingers trembling as she served coffee. When I mentioned that David had left some messages, her cup crashed to the floor. "What kind of messages?" she asked, and for the first time in 5 years, I heard something in my daughter-in-law's voice that made my blood run cold. Fear, guilt, and something much darker. What I was about to discover would make that tragic accident just the beginning of a nightmare that would destroy everything I thought I knew about my son's life. That night, I couldn't sleep. Sarah's reaction to my mention of David's messages kept replaying in my mind like a broken record. I sat in my kitchen at 3 a.m, staring at his phone, gathering the courage to explore what my son had been so desperate to tell me. The phone was still unlocked. David had never been good with technology. I scrolled through his recent calls and found something that made my heart stop. 3 calls to a private investigator named Marcus Webb, all made in the past 2 weeks. The last call was just 4 hours before the accident. I pressed the number with shaking fingers. A deep voice answered on the second ring. "Webb Investigations, Marcus speaking." "This is Marianne Rutherford," I whispered, David Rutherford's mother. He passed away yesterday in a car accident." The silence that followed was so long, I thought the line had gone dead. "Mrs. Rutherford," he finally said, his voice heavy with something I couldn't identify. "I'm very sorry for your loss. David he was a good man who loved his family very much. Mr. Webb, I need to know what my son hired you to investigate." Another pause. "Ma'am, I think we need to meet in person. There are things David discovered about his wife that, well, they're not things you discuss over the phone." We arranged to meet the next morning at a small cafe downtown. I spent the rest of the night going through David's phone more carefully. In his photos, I found screenshots of bank statements I'd never seen before, large withdrawals from accounts I didn't know existed, transfers to offshore companies with names that meant nothing to me. But what chilled me to the bone was a photo of a marriage certificate. Sarah's marriage certificate to a man named Robert Collins, dated just 2 years before she'd supposedly met David. At the cafe, Marcus Webb turned out to be a man in his 50s with tired eyes and calloused hands. He carried a manila envelope that he placed carefully on the table between us. "Mrs. Rutherford, your son came to me 3 weeks ago because he'd started noticing discrepancies in their finances. Money disappearing, credit cards he hadn't applied for, things like that. What we found..." He opened the envelope and pulled out a thick stack of documents. "Sarah Elizabeth Morrison, that's her real name, has been married 4 times in the past 8 years." My coffee cup froze halfway to my lips. "All 4 husbands died in accidents," he continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "Car crashes, falls, a drowning. Each time, she inherited substantial life insurance policies. Each time, she disappeared within 6 months of the funeral." The cafe around me seemed to spin. I gripped the edge of the table to steady myself. "Mr. Webb, are you telling me that my daughter-in-law is a..." I couldn't even say the word. "I'm telling you that David believed his life was in danger. He'd started gathering evidence, planning to go to the police. The last time we spoke, he said he was afraid for his children's safety." He pulled out another document, a handwritten note in David's familiar scrawl. "If something happens to me, make sure Mom gets Emma and Tommy. Don't let Sarah take them anywhere. There's a safe deposit box at First National Bank, box number 479. The key is taped under my desk drawer at home." My hands were shaking so violently I could barely hold the paper. "Mr. Webb, my son's accident. Do you think..." "Mrs. Rutherford," he said, leaning forward and lowering his voice even further. "Your son's car was inspected after the crash. The brake lines had been cut. The world around me seemed to tilt and blur. Everything I thought I knew about David's death, about Sarah, about our family, crumbled in that moment. My sweet, loving daughter-in-law, who had cried so beautifully at the funeral, who had let me hold her while she sobbed about losing the love of her life, was not who I thought she was. But there was something else Marcus Webb wasn't telling me. I could see it in the way he kept glancing at his watch, in the nervous way he tapped his fingers on the table. "Mr. Webb, what aren't you telling me?" He sighed deeply and pulled out one final photograph. It showed Sarah at what looked like an airport, holding hands with a tall man in an expensive suit. The timestamp was from yesterday, the day after David's funeral. "Mrs. Rutherford, I've been watching Sarah since David's death. She's not grieving. She's preparing to leave. And based on what I saw this morning," he paused, his face grave, "she's already started the process of moving the children out of state." I felt something cold and hard settle in my chest. My grandchildren, my innocent, beautiful grandchildren, were in danger. David had died trying to protect them, and now it was up to me. "Mr. Webb," I said, my voice stronger than I felt, "I need to know everything. Every detail, every document, every piece of evidence. Because I'm going to get that safe deposit box key, and I'm going to finish what my son started." For the first time since I'd met him, Marcus Webb smiled. "Mrs. Rutherford, David said you were tougher than you looked. I think he was right." As I left that cafe, I realized my life as a quiet, retired librarian was over. I was about to enter a world I never imagined existed, fighting an enemy I never knew I had. But for Emma and Tommy, for David's memory, I would become whatever I needed to become. The war for my family's survival had just begun. That afternoon, I drove to David's house with Marcus Webb's revelations burning in my mind. Sarah's car wasn't in the driveway. She'd mentioned taking the children to her mother's house for a few days. The perfect opportunity to search for that safe deposit box key. I used my spare key to enter the house where I'd spent countless Sunday dinners, where I'd watched my grandchildren take their first steps, where I'd believed my family was safe and happy. Now, every corner seemed to hide secrets. Every photograph on the wall felt like a lie. David's home office was exactly as he'd left it. His coffee cup still sat on the desk, half empty and cold. I knelt beside his desk and felt along the underside of the bottom drawer until my fingers found something taped there. A small silver key. But as I pulled it free, I heard the front door open. "Mom? What are you doing here?" Sarah's voice sent ice through my veins. I quickly pocketed the key and stood up, trying to appear casual. "Oh, sweetheart, I wanted to feel close to David. I hope you don't mind." Sarah appeared in the doorway, and for the first time, I really looked at her, really studied her face. The tears that had flowed so freely at the funeral were gone. Her eyes were calculating, sharp. She was wearing expensive jewelry I'd never seen before, and her purse looked like it cost more than my monthly pension. "Of course I don't mind," she said, but her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Actually, I'm glad you're here. I wanted to talk to you about the children." My heart clenched. "What about them?" "Well, this house holds so many painful memories for them now. I think it would be best if we made a fresh start somewhere new. My sister lives in Oregon, and she's offered to help us settle there." Oregon. A different state, where I couldn't easily visit, couldn't easily check on Emma and Tommy. "That seems sudden," I managed to say. "Grief makes everything feel sudden," Sarah replied, still smiling that cold smile. "The children need stability, and frankly, Mom, I think it might be healthier if they had some distance from reminders." Reminders. She meant me. "Where are Emma and Tommy now?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "At my mother's. They're having such a wonderful time. In fact, I was thinking it might be good for them to stay there for a few weeks while I handle all the arrangements." A chill ran down my spine. Marcus Webb's words echoed in my mind. She's already started the process of moving the children out of state. As I tried to connect the dots, I got curious. Where are you listening to me from right now? Drop your city in the comments. I like to imagine these stories echoing in so many different places. I needed to get out of there and check that safe deposit box immediately. But as I headed toward the door, Sarah's hand touched my arm. "Mom, there's something else. David's life insurance policy. It's quite substantial. More than I ever realized. The lawyers say it might take months to process everything. But when it does..." She paused, her grip tightening slightly on my arm. "Well, let's just say the children will be very well provided for." The way she said children made my blood run cold. There was something possessive in her tone, something that suggested Emma and Tommy were assets to be managed rather than children to be loved. That evening, I drove to First National Bank and waited in the parking lot until they opened the next morning. The safe deposit box key felt like it was burning a hole in my pocket. When the bank manager finally led me to box 479, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely turn the key. Inside, I found documents that made Marcus Webb's revelations look like child's play. Marriage certificates, not just the one I'd seen, but 5 others. Sarah had been married 6 times, not 4. 3 of the death certificates were there too. Robert Collins, drowned during a romantic cruise. Michael Harrison, fell down the stairs in his own home. James Peterson, car accident on an icy road. The pattern was clear, methodical, terrifying. But it was the insurance policies that made me gasp out loud. Each husband had been insured for progressively larger amounts. David's policy was for $2 million, double what Sarah had told me. There were also custody documents, pre-signed papers that would give Sarah full legal custody of Emma and Tommy, with a provision that specifically excluded interfering grandparents from visitation rights. David had never signed these papers, but someone had forged his signature. The last item in the box was a letter addressed to me in David's handwriting. "Mom, if you're reading this, then Sarah has probably already put her plan into motion. I've been investigating her for weeks, and what I've found terrifies me. She's not just after money. She's building a network. There are other women involved, other targets. Check the name Amanda Foster. She's Sarah's sister in Oregon. She's not Sarah's sister at all. She's her partner. I've hidden copies of everything in Emma's bedroom, inside her dollhouse, in the compartment behind the pink door. Whatever you do, don't let Sarah take the children away. I love you, Mom. Protect them." My hands were trembling as I finished reading. This wasn't just about one woman killing her husbands for money. This was about an organized operation, a network of women who targeted vulnerable men, married them, eliminated them, and moved on. And now they had their sights set on something even more valuable than insurance money: my grandchildren. I drove straight back to David's house, but when I arrived, my worst fears were confirmed. Sarah's car was gone, and so were most of her belongings. The house felt hollow, abandoned. I ran upstairs to Emma's room and found the dollhouse David had built for her 3rd birthday. My fingers fumbled with the tiny pink door until it opened, revealing a small compartment. Inside were USB drives, photographs, and more documents that painted an even darker picture of the network Sarah was part of. Photos of Sarah with different women in different cities, bank routing numbers, a list of names with dollar amounts next to them, amounts that could only be insurance payouts. And at the bottom of the list, in red ink, were the words, "Next targets, Portland family, estimated value, 3.5 million plus assets." My phone buzzed with a text message from Sarah. "Mom, the children and I have decided to spend some time with family in Oregon. Don't worry, we'll be in touch soon." But I knew better. I knew that if I let them disappear into that network, I would never see Emma and Tommy again. And worse, I would never be able to prove what had really happened to David. As I sat in my granddaughter's empty bedroom, surrounded by evidence of a conspiracy that had already claimed my son's life, I realized that Sarah had made one crucial mistake. She had underestimated a grandmother's love and a retired librarian's ability to research. David had given me the tools to fight back. Now I had to decide if I was brave enough to use them, knowing that if I failed, I might not only lose my grandchildren forever, I might become the next victim in Sarah's deadly game. The network was vast, organized, and ruthless, but they had never faced someone like me, someone who had nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. I spent the entire night going through the USB drives David had hidden, and what I discovered made me question everything I thought I knew about my family. The network Sarah belonged to wasn't just about targeting random men. They specifically sought out widowers with children, men who were vulnerable and desperate for companionship. But the most devastating revelation came in a series of recorded phone calls that David had somehow managed to capture. Sarah's voice, clear as day, talking to someone about their operation. "The old lady is getting suspicious," Sarah said in one recording. David must have told her something before the accident. "We might need to accelerate the timeline." "How much does she know?" another woman's voice asked. The voice I now knew belonged to Amanda Foster. "Not enough to be dangerous yet, but she's smart. Smarter than Robert's mother was. Or Michael's. She's asking questions. Then maybe it's time to expand the plan. 2 accidents in one family might raise eyebrows. But if it's done right..." My blood turned to ice. They were talking about killing me too. But then Sarah said something that shattered my heart completely. "The children are the real prize here anyway. Do you know how much money people will pay for well-behaved, attractive children with clean backgrounds? Especially international buyers?" I had to grip the edge of David's desk to keep from collapsing. They weren't just planning to disappear with Emma and Tommy. They were planning to sell them. The recording continued, and Amanda's voice became businesslike. "How long until the insurance money comes through?" 3 weeks, maybe 4. But I've already started liquidating David's other assets. The house should sell quickly. It's in a good neighborhood. Between the insurance, the house, his retirement accounts, and the children, we're looking at close to 4 million total. And the grandmother? She'll have an accident. Something believable. She's old. Lives alone. Heart attack. Fall down the stairs. Something like that. I'm thinking next week, before she can cause any more problems. I pulled the headphones off with shaking hands. My daughter-in-law, the woman who had called me Mom for 5 years, who had let me babysit my grandchildren, who had cried in my arms at David's funeral, was planning to murder me and sell my grandchildren to strangers. But there was more. The USB drives contained financial records that showed this network had been operating for over a decade. Dozens of men had died. Dozens of children had simply vanished from public records after their fathers' deaths. The money trail led to offshore accounts, shell companies, and what appeared to be an international trafficking operation. I found photographs that made my stomach turn. Pictures of children who had been acquired through similar operations, now living with new families in foreign countries. Some of the children looked happy, but others looked broken, frightened, lost. My phone rang, startling me out of my horrified trance. It was an unknown number. "Hello? Grandma Marianne?" It was Emma's voice, small and scared. "Emma? Sweetheart? Where are you?" "I don't know. Mommy said we're on vacation, but this isn't vacation. We're in a house with strangers, and Tommy is crying all the time. Grandma, I want to come home." My heart broke into a million pieces. "Emma, honey, can you tell me anything about where you are? What do you see outside the window?" "Mountains, big mountains. And there's a sign that says, I can't read all the words, but it starts with well, and ends with Oregon. Emma, listen to me very carefully. You and Tommy need to stay together, okay? Don't eat or drink anything unless Mommy gives it to you personally. If anyone tries to separate you and Tommy, you scream as loud as you can. Do you understand? Grandma, I'm scared. The lady here isn't nice like Mommy pretends. When Mommy's not looking, she's mean. And there are other children here, but they look sad. One little boy keeps asking for his daddy, but nobody answers him. The line went dead. I immediately called Marcus Webb. When he answered, I was barely coherent. They have them, I sobbed. They have my grandchildren, and they're not just planning to take them away. They're going to sell them. Marcus, they're going to sell Emma and Tommy to strangers. Mrs. Rutherford, slow down. Tell me exactly what you found. I explained everything. The recordings, the financial documents, Emma's phone call. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Mrs. Rutherford, we're dealing with something much bigger than I initially thought. This isn't just about insurance fraud. This is human trafficking on an organized scale. We need to contact the FBI immediately. No, I said, surprising myself with the force of my voice. If we involve law enforcement now, they'll disappear. You heard what Emma said. There are other children there. This is an established operation. They probably have escape routes, new identities, everything planned. Then what do you suggest? I was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then I remembered something from the recordings. Sarah mentioned that they need to wait for the insurance money before they can complete their operation. That gives us maybe 3 weeks. But Marcus, there's something else. In David's files, I found evidence that Sarah's been communicating with someone called the facilitator, someone who arranges the final transactions. Do you know who that is? I think I do. My voice was steady now, cold with determination. It's my own sister. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. Mrs. Rutherford, what do you mean? My sister Janet lives in Seattle. She's always had more money than her job should provide, always traveling to exotic places, always evasive about how she affords her lifestyle. I found her name in David's files, Marcus. She's not just involved. I think she might be running the entire operation. The betrayal cut deeper than everything else combined. My own sister, who had comforted me when David died, who had offered to help with funeral expenses, who had suggested that maybe it would be healthy for Sarah to take the children somewhere new to heal. Janet had been grooming me to accept my grandchildren's disappearance. There's something else, I continued, my voice getting stronger with each word. Janet called me yesterday. She said she was planning to visit next week to help me process my grief. Marcus, I think that's when they're planning to kill me. Mrs. Rutherford, you can't stay in your house. It's not safe. I'm not going anywhere. If they want to find me, let them come. But I'm not running from my own family while my grandchildren are in danger. I hung up the phone and looked around David's empty house. For 67 years, I had been Marianne Rutherford, the quiet librarian, the devoted mother, the loving grandmother. I had followed rules, trusted family, believed in the goodness of people. But that woman was gone now. In her place was someone harder, someone who understood that sometimes you have to fight monsters to protect the innocent. Someone who realized that the most dangerous predators often wear the faces of people you love. I had 3 weeks to save Emma and Tommy. 3 weeks to bring down a network that had been operating for over a decade. 3 weeks to outsmart people who had made a career of destroying families. But I had something they didn't expect. I had a grandmother's fury, a lifetime of research skills, and nothing left to lose. The war was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. The next morning, I woke up to find my front door slightly ajar. I knew I had locked it the night before. Someone had been in my house while I slept. Nothing seemed to be missing, but everything felt violated. My coffee cup had been moved. Papers on my kitchen table were in a slightly different order. Someone had searched my home, carefully, professionally, looking for evidence of what I knew. I called Marcus Webb immediately. They know, I whispered into the phone. They know I have David's files. Mrs. Rutherford, pack a bag right now. I'm coming to get you. No, if I disappear, they'll panic and move the children immediately. I need to act normal. Make them think I'm just a grieving grandmother who doesn't suspect anything. But even as I said it, I knew my time was running out. I had to move faster, smarter. I decided to do something that went against every instinct I had as a law-abiding citizen. I was going to break into my sister's house. Janet lived in an upscale neighborhood in Seattle, about 4 hours from my home. She traveled frequently for what she claimed was her consulting business, and according to her social media, she was currently in Thailand. The perfect opportunity. I drove to Seattle that afternoon, my heart pounding with every mile. I had never broken into anything in my life, but David's files had contained detailed information about Janet's security system. Apparently, she had been careless in her communications with Sarah. Janet's house was a modern glass and steel structure that must have cost well over $1 million, far more than any legitimate consulting business could afford. I parked 3 blocks away and walked to her house, carrying a small bag of tools that Marcus Webb had given me, along with instructions I never thought I'd need. The security code was Emma's birthday, another detail from the intercepted communications. The irony made me sick. Inside, Janet's house was like a museum. Expensive art, designer furniture, and photographs from exotic locations around the world. But it was the basement that revealed the true horror of what I was dealing with. Janet had an entire office dedicated to the network's operations. Multiple computers, filing cabinets full of documents, and a wall covered with photographs and information about targets, men like David, along with detailed profiles of their children and assets. I found a file labeled Pacific Northwest Operations that contained dozens of cases dating back 15 years. Each file told the same story. Lonely widower meets charming woman, whirlwind romance, quick marriage, convenient accident, disappearing children. The efficiency was terrifying, but what made my blood run cold was a folder marked Current Operations. Inside were detailed plans for 5 different families currently being targeted. Sarah's operation with David was just one of many happening simultaneously across the country. I photographed everything with my phone, my hands shaking as I documented the scope of the network. There were connections to similar operations in Canada, Mexico, and several European countries. This wasn't just a regional crime ring, it was an international organization. Then I found the communications folder. Email printouts between Janet and someone identified only as C revealed the true structure of the operation. Janet wasn't running it. She was a regional manager reporting to someone much more powerful, someone who referred to the children as inventory and the murdered fathers as overhead costs. One email, dated just 3 days ago, made my heart stop. J. Portland grandmother becoming problem. Recommend immediate acceleration of timeline. Insurance payout not necessary if asset recovery can be completed within 48 hours. Children already pre-sold to Singapore buyers. Transfer should happen by Friday. Eliminate liability, grandmother, by Thursday. Make it look natural, heart attack or home accident. Use the usual methods. C. Today was Tuesday. They were planning to kill me in 2 days and ship Emma and Tommy to Singapore by Friday. I was photographing the last of the documents when I heard a car door slam outside. Through the basement window, I could see Janet's Mercedes in the driveway. She was supposed to be in Thailand for another week. I quickly gathered the most important documents and stuffed them into my bag, then looked around frantically for another way out. The basement had a small window that led to the backyard, but it was barely large enough for me to squeeze through. I heard Janet's voice upstairs, talking on the phone. Yes, I had to come back early. She's been to David's house multiple times, and someone saw her at the bank. We can't wait any longer. I managed to squeeze through the window just as I heard footsteps on the basement stairs. I ran through Janet's backyard and into the neighboring property, staying low behind hedges and parked cars until I reached my vehicle. As I drove away, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Stop looking for things that will only hurt you. Think about your health. Some grief is too much for an old heart to bear. The threat was clear, but so was my resolve. I now had concrete evidence of an international trafficking network, proof of multiple murders, and documentation of their plan to eliminate me and sell my grandchildren. But I also had something they didn't know about. In Janet's files, I had found the location where they were keeping Emma and Tommy, a compound outside Portland that was registered as a children's retreat center, but was actually a holding facility for kidnapped children waiting to be trafficked. More importantly, I had found the identity of C, Charles Morrison, Sarah's supposed uncle, who was actually the mastermind behind the entire operation. He owned legitimate businesses that served as fronts for the trafficking network, moving companies, private schools, and international adoption agencies. I called Marcus Webb from a gas station halfway home. "Marcus, I know where they are. I know where they're keeping the children, and I know who's running the whole operation. Mrs. Rutherford, please tell me you didn't do what I think you did. I broke into Janet's house, and I found everything. Marcus, there are dozens of children being held at this facility. Emma and Tommy are just two of many. We have to act now, tonight, before they move them. Mrs. Rutherford, this is beyond what we can handle alone. We need law enforcement. Law enforcement will take time we don't have. By the time they get warrants and organize a raid, those children will be gone." Janet's files showed that children are usually moved within 72 hours of arrival at the compound. I could hear Marcus breathing heavily on the other end of the line. "There's something else, Marcus. I found a contact in Janet's files, someone on the inside who's been helping children escape. A woman named Dr. Lisa Chen, who works at the compound as a supposed child psychologist. She's been documenting everything, gathering evidence, waiting for the right moment to bring the whole network down. How do you know she can be trusted? Because David was in contact with her. There are emails between them going back months. She's the one who told him about the safe deposit box, who helped him gather evidence. She's been waiting for someone like us. The plan that formed in my mind was dangerous, probably illegal, and definitely beyond anything I had ever imagined myself capable of. But as I thought about Emma's scared voice on the phone, about Tommy crying for his daddy, about all the other children trapped in that compound, I knew I had no choice. I was about to become someone I never thought I could be. Someone willing to break laws to save lives, someone ready to fight trained criminals with nothing but determination and love. The quiet librarian was gone forever. In her place stood a woman who would do whatever it took to bring her grandchildren home. Dr. Lisa Chen agreed to meet me at a 24-hour diner outside Portland at 2 a.m. When I saw her walk through the door, a small Asian woman in her 40s with tired eyes and nervous hands, I almost didn't believe she could be the person who had been secretly documenting one of the most sophisticated criminal networks in the country. But when she sat down across from me and pulled out a tablet filled with videos, photographs, and recorded conversations, I realized I was looking at the bravest person I had ever met. "Mrs. Rutherford," she said quietly, "what I'm about to show you will change everything you think you know about this operation. It's worse than David suspected. It's worse than anything you found in your sister's files." She turned the tablet toward me, and I found myself looking at security footage from inside the compound. Children of various ages sitting in sterile white rooms, some crying, some staring blankly at walls, others huddled together for comfort. But what made my stomach turn was the clinical way adults in white coats moved among them, taking notes, measuring heights and weights, examining teeth like they were livestock. "The compound isn't just a holding facility," Dr. Chen explained. "It's a processing center. They evaluate each child for different markets. Some children are sold to wealthy couples who want to adopt illegally. Others are sent to labor operations. And some," she paused, her voice breaking slightly, "some are sold to much darker markets." I gripped the edge of the table to steady myself. "Where are Emma and Tommy?" Dr. Chen swiped to another video. There they were, my beautiful grandchildren sitting on a small bed in a white room, Emma holding Tommy protectively against her. Emma looked thin and scared, but she was still trying to take care of her little brother, just like David had taught her. "They arrived yesterday," Dr. Chen said. "So far, they've been classified as premium adoption candidates because of their age, appearance, and background. That means they'll likely be sold to buyers who want them for illegal adoption rather than—" She didn't finish the sentence, but I understood. "How long do we have?" "Normally, children stay here for a week to 10 days, while buyers are contacted and arrangements are made. But Emma and Tommy are different. There's already a buyer lined up, a wealthy businessman in Singapore who specifically requested American children under 10 with blonde hair and blue eyes. The transfer is scheduled for Friday morning. That's 3 days from now. Mrs. Rutherford, there's something else you need to know. The network isn't just about trafficking children, it's about creating them." I stared at her, not understanding. Dr. Chen pulled up another file on her tablet. Charles Morrison, the man running this operation, has been perfecting this system for over 20 years. He doesn't just target random widowers, he creates them. She showed me a spreadsheet with hundreds of names. These are men who have been specifically targeted and eliminated by women in the network. But look at the pattern. As I studied the list, a horrifying picture emerged. The men weren't chosen randomly. They were selected based on specific criteria. They all had young children, substantial assets, and no extended family support systems. But more than that, many of them had been introduced to their eventual wives through what appeared to be chance encounters. Morrison owns a chain of companies that create opportunities for these meetings, Dr. Chen explained. Dating services, social clubs, charity organizations, even grocery stores and coffee shops in specific neighborhoods. The women in his network don't just find targets, they're assigned them. You're saying that David meeting Sarah wasn't an accident? Mrs. Rutherford, your son was selected 3 years before Sarah ever spoke to him. They studied his habits, his routines, his psychological profile. They knew exactly what kind of woman he would be attracted to, exactly how to make him fall in love. The betrayal felt like a physical blow. David's marriage, the happiness I had seen in his eyes, the love he thought he had found, all of it had been calculated, manufactured, designed to end with his death and the theft of his children. But there's something even worse, Dr. Chen continued. This isn't Morrison's first generation of operations. He started this network in the 1990s. Some of the women working for him now, including your sister Janet, were children who were trafficked through earlier versions of this same system. I felt the blood drain from my face. What are you saying? I'm saying that Janet wasn't born into this criminal life. She was kidnapped as a child, processed through a facility like this one, and instead of being sold, she was raised within the network to become one of their operatives. It's how Morrison ensures loyalty. He creates his workforce from childhood. Dr. Chen showed me photographs that made everything click into place. Janet as a young teenager, working in what looked like office settings. Janet in her 20s, learning to manipulate financial systems. Janet in her 30s, recruiting and training other women. Your sister has been working for this network for over 30 years. She's not just a regional manager. She's one of Morrison's most trusted operatives. And Mrs. Rutherford, according to the files I've accessed, she volunteered to handle your elimination personally. The woman I had grown up with, who had braided my hair and shared secrets and stood beside me at our parents' funerals, was planning to murder me herself. There's more, Dr. Chen said, and I could see her hands shaking as she pulled up the final file. The network doesn't just steal children and eliminate fathers. They've been systematically targeting specific genetic lines. She showed me a document that looked like a scientific study. Morrison has been working with buyers who request children with specific characteristics, not just physical appearance, but intelligence levels, athletic ability, even artistic talent. He's been building a database of family genetic profiles for decades. Emma and Tommy aren't just valuable because they're young and attractive. They're valuable because David was exceptionally intelligent. He was a software engineer with 2 patents to his name. Your family line shows patterns of high academic achievement, creativity, and what Morrison's buyers call desirable traits. The scope of what I was learning made my head spin. This wasn't just about money, or even just about trafficking. This was about breeding human beings like livestock, about treating children as commodities to be harvested and sold based on their genetic potential. Dr. Chen, how many children are currently in the compound? 43, ages ranging from 3 to 15. Some have been there for weeks, waiting for the right buyer. Others are being, she paused, others are being prepared for specific requests. What kind of preparation? Language training, behavioral modification, sometimes medical procedures. Mrs. Rutherford, some buyers want children who have been altered to meet specific requirements. I couldn't process what she was telling me. The evil was too vast, too systematic, too carefully organized. But here's what Morrison doesn't know, Dr. Chen said, leaning forward. I've been working with federal agents for the past 2 years. We've been building a case, gathering evidence, mapping the entire network. We're close to bringing down the whole operation. Then why haven't you acted already? Because every time we move against one part of the network, They shut down and relocate. Morrison has spent decades building escape routes and backup systems. If we don't get everyone at once, they disappear and start again somewhere else. Dr. Chen pulled out a phone and showed me a text message. Package delivery confirmed for Friday, 0600 hours. Singapore buyer has made final payment. Liquidate all Portland assets after transfer. Mrs. Rutherford, liquidate all Portland assets means they're planning to eliminate everyone who could testify against them. Not just you. Every child in that compound who isn't being shipped to Singapore is going to be eliminated to prevent witnesses. I felt something cold and hard settle in my chest. 43 children, babies, toddlers, school-age kids like Emma and Tommy, all of them scheduled to die in 3 days unless I did something. Dr. Chen, what's the plan? Tomorrow night, federal agents will raid the compound. But Mrs. Rutherford, there's a problem. Morrison has someone inside law enforcement feeding him information. Every raid we've planned has been compromised. The children get moved before we arrive. Then what do you suggest? Dr. Chen was quiet for a long moment. There is one option, but it's dangerous, probably illegal, and if it goes wrong, everyone dies. Tell me. I can get you inside the compound. There's a service entrance that I can leave unlocked tomorrow night. If you can create enough confusion, a fire alarm, a power outage, something that forces an evacuation, the federal agents can move in during the chaos. And the children? There's a bus that's used for transporting children to medical appointments. If someone could get to that bus during the confusion and drive it to the federal checkpoint. She didn't finish, but I understood. I was being asked to break into a heavily guarded compound, steal a bus full of kidnapped children, and somehow get them to safety while evading trained criminals who wouldn't hesitate to eliminate anyone who threatened their operation. For 67 years, I had been a law-abiding citizen. I had never even gotten a speeding ticket. But as I looked at the tablet showing my grandchildren sitting scared and alone in that sterile white room, I knew there was no choice to make. Dr. Chen, I said, my voice steady and cold, tell me everything I need to know about that compound, because tomorrow night I'm bringing those children home. The quiet librarian was about to become something much more dangerous, a grandmother with nothing left to lose and 43 innocent lives to save. The next day passed in a blur of preparation that felt like planning for war. Marcus Webb had connected me with his contact in the federal task force, Agent Sarah Martinez, who looked far too young to be handling cases this serious, but whose eyes held the kind of steel that told me she had seen enough evil to understand what we were facing. Mrs. Rutherford, Agent Martinez said, as we sat in an unmarked van outside the compound at dusk, I want you to understand that once you go through that service entrance, you'll be committing multiple felonies, breaking and entering, interfering with a federal investigation, potentially kidnapping charges if this goes wrong. Agent Martinez, I replied, checking the small communication device Dr. Chen had given me. Those children have been kidnapped, tortured, and scheduled for elimination. If following the law means letting them die, then I guess I'm about to become a criminal. The compound looked like an ordinary retreat center from the outside, wooden buildings surrounded by tall fences, security cameras, and signs advertising Peaceful Pines Children's Therapeutic Center. But Dr. Chen had shown me the real layout. Underground tunnels connected the buildings, soundproof rooms where children were held, medical facilities where unspeakable things happened to prepare children for specific buyers. Dr. Chen's voice crackled through my earpiece. Marianne, I'm at my station. Security rotation changes in 10 minutes. That's your window. I had spent the day studying the compound's layout, memorizing every corridor, every exit, every camera angle. I knew that Building C held the younger children, including Emma and Tommy. Building A housed the older kids who were being prepared for labor operations. Building B was Morrison's command center, where he coordinated operations across multiple states. But what I hadn't told Agent Martinez or Dr. Chen was that I wasn't just planning to rescue the children. I was planning to end this entire operation permanently. In my bag, along with bolt cutters and a small flashlight, I carried something that would have shocked everyone who knew the quiet librarian I used to be. Marcus Webb had given me a device that would not only disable the compound's security system, but also download every file from Morrison's computers before destroying them. The federal task force wants evidence, Marcus had explained. But sometimes the only way to stop monsters is to destroy their ability to keep creating new monsters. At exactly 9:45 p.m., I cut through the service fence and slipped into the compound. The night air was cold, and my breath created small clouds as I moved between shadows. Every muscle in my body was tensed, ready to run or fight if necessary. The service entrance Dr. Chen had promised was unlocked, leading me into a basement corridor lined with industrial laundry equipment. The smell hit me immediately. Disinfectant trying to cover something much worse. This was where they processed the children's belongings, where they erased every trace of the lives these kids had been stolen from. I moved through the corridor, following the mental map I had memorized. Building C was 2 floors up and across a covered walkway. As I climbed the service stairs, I could hear voices, guards talking casually about sports, completely unaware that their entire operation was about to crumble. But when I reached the walkway to Building C, I froze. Through the windows, I could see something that Dr. Chen hadn't prepared me for. Morrison himself was there, talking to a group of men in expensive suits. Even from a distance, I could see briefcases full of money-changing hands. The Singapore buyer hadn't waited until Friday. He was here now, making his selection tonight. I pressed my communication device and whispered urgently, "Dr. Chen, the buyers are here early. They're in Building C right now. Marianne, abort, get out immediately. If they're making transactions tonight, the security is tripled." But through the window, I could see them bringing children into the main room. Emma and Tommy were among them, along with about 15 other kids, ranging from toddlers to young teenagers. The children stood in a line while the men in suits examined them like they were shopping for pets. In that moment, alone, I knew there was no turning back. But I found myself thinking, if you were in my shoes, would you have the courage to face it, or would you stay silent to survive? Write in the comments, I really want to know. I had 2 choices: retreat to safety and hope the federal raid scheduled for tomorrow would somehow work despite the compromised timeline, or act now while I had the element of surprise. I chose to fight. I made my way to Building B first, Morrison's command center. If I was going to save these children, I needed to destroy the network's ability to relocate and start again. The building was less heavily guarded because all the security was focused on the transaction happening in Building C. Breaking into Morrison's office was easier than I expected. Dr. Chen had given me his access codes, stolen during her months of careful observation. What I found inside made me understand why the federal task force had been struggling to build their case. Morrison's operation was protected at the highest levels. I found emails between him and people with government email addresses, judges, police commissioners, social services directors. The network wasn't just sophisticated. It was protected by people in positions of power who were either being paid or blackmailed into cooperation. But the files also revealed something else, a complete list of every child who had been processed through this network over the past 20 years. Thousands of names, ages, descriptions of where they had been sent. Some were marked deceased in red letters. I photographed everything, uploaded it to the secure server Dr. Chen had provided, then inserted Marcus's device into Morrison's main computer. Within minutes, every file was being copied and simultaneously destroyed. Then the alarm started blaring. My earpiece crackled. "Marianne, they know you're in the building. Morrison's men are heading to Building B. You need to get out now." But instead of running, I did something that surprised even me. I triggered the fire suppression system throughout the entire compound. Water and foam began pouring from ceiling sprinklers in every building. Emergency lighting activated, and most importantly, automatic safety protocols began unlocking doors throughout the compound, including the doors holding the children. "Dr. Chen," I whispered into my communicator as I ran toward Building C. "The children's doors are unlocking. Can you guide them to the bus?" "Marianne, what have you done? The entire compound is in chaos. I've given us our chance. Get those kids to safety." I reached Building C just as Morrison's men were trying to evacuate the buyers and secure the children. But the fire suppression system had created perfect cover. Visibility was near zero, alarms were deafening, and everyone was focused on getting out safely rather than maintaining security. I found Emma and Tommy huddled together near an emergency exit, soaking wet but unharmed. When Emma saw me, her face lit up with relief and joy that made every risk I had taken worthwhile. "Grandma, you came for us." "Of course I did, sweetheart. We're going home." But as I gathered my grandchildren and started moving toward the exit, I came face to face with someone I had hoped never to see again. Janet stood blocking the doorway, no longer bothering to hide behind her mask of sisterly concern. Her face was cold, calculating, and angry. "Hello, Marianne. You've caused quite a bit of trouble tonight." "Janet, get out of my way. These children are coming with me." "I'm afraid that's not possible. You see, you've just destroyed a very lucrative operation. People have invested significant money, and they expect returns." Behind Janet, I could see Morrison himself approaching, flanked by two large men who clearly weren't there to help with evacuation procedures. "Mrs. Rutherford," Morrison said, in a voice that was surprisingly calm given the chaos around us. "You've put me in a very difficult position. These children represent contracted goods. Legal obligations must be met. The only legal obligation here is to return these children to safety." Morrison smiled, but there was nothing warm about it. "Mrs. Rutherford, I think you misunderstand your situation. You're trespassing on private property, interfering with legal business transactions, and stealing valuable assets." I pulled Emma and Tommy closer to me, feeling their small bodies trembling with fear and cold. "Dr. Chen," I whispered into my communicator, "I'm trapped in Building C with Morrison. The children need immediate extraction." But Morrison must have heard me because he gestured to one of his men, who quickly disabled my communication device. "I'm afraid your accomplice can't help you now," Morrison said. "Dr. Chen has been a valuable employee, but she seems to have forgotten where her loyalties should lie." The implication was clear. Dr. Chen was in as much danger as we were. "Janet," I said, looking at my sister with a mixture of heartbreak and fury, "how could you do this? How could you become part of something so evil?" For just a moment, something flickered in Janet's eyes. Maybe regret, maybe pain. But it disappeared quickly. "Marianne, you've lived your whole life in a fantasy where good people are rewarded and evil people are punished. The real world doesn't work that way. Sometimes survival means making choices that sheltered people like you could never understand. Survival doesn't mean destroying innocent children. These children were already destroyed the moment their fathers were selected for elimination. We're just making the best of an unfortunate situation." I realized in that moment that my sister, the person I had grown up with, laughed with, shared secrets with, was truly gone. Whatever Janet had once been, whatever humanity she might have possessed, had been systematically destroyed by decades of participating in Morrison's network. But I also realized something else. I was no longer the frightened grandmother who had discovered her son's recordings a week ago. I was someone who had broken into a criminal compound, destroyed a sophisticated computer network, and triggered a chaos that was currently allowing dozens of children to escape to freedom. "Morrison," I said, my voice steady and cold, "you made one mistake." "And what's that, Mrs. Rutherford?" "You underestimated what a grandmother will do to protect her family." I triggered the small device Marcus had given me for emergencies. A localized EMP that would disable all electronic systems within a 50-foot radius. The building's emergency lighting died, plunging us into darkness. In the confusion that followed, I grabbed Emma and Tommy and ran for the nearest exit, knowing that Morrison's men would be following, knowing that this was far from over, but also knowing that for the first time since David's death, I was fighting back. The quiet librarian was gone forever. In her place was a warrior grandmother who would burn down the entire world before she let anyone hurt her family again. The darkness lasted only seconds before backup generators kicked in, bathing the compound in eerie red emergency lighting. I had Emma and Tommy pressed against my sides as we moved through corridors filled with rushing water from the fire suppression system, but I could hear Morrison's men shouting behind us, their footsteps getting closer. "Grandma, I'm scared," Tommy whispered, his small hand gripping mine so tightly it hurt. "I know, sweetheart, but we're going to be okay. I promise." But even as I said it, I knew we were trapped. The main exits were blocked by Morrison's security team, and the service entrance I had used was too far away to reach before they caught us. That's when I heard Dr. Chen's voice echoing through the emergency speaker system. "All children to the East Wing cafeteria. Follow the green emergency lights. Help is waiting. She was alive, and she was helping coordinate the evacuation. But as we moved toward the east wing, I realized we weren't alone. Other children were emerging from rooms throughout the building, kids of all ages, some crying, others moving with the blank expressions of those who had been traumatized beyond tears. I counted at least 20 children making their way through the flooded corridors, and my heart broke thinking about how long some of them had been imprisoned here, what they had endured, what they had been forced to witness. We reached the cafeteria just as Agent Martinez and her team burst through the main entrance. The federal raid was happening now, ahead of schedule, triggered by the chaos I had created. "Mrs. Rutherford," Agent Martinez shouted over the alarms, "get the children to the bus outside. We'll hold Morrison's men here." But as I started moving the children toward the exit, Morrison himself appeared in the doorway, flanked by Janet and several armed men. In the red emergency lighting, he looked like something from a nightmare. Calm, controlled, and absolutely furious. "Agent Martinez," Morrison said in that same eerily calm voice, "I believe there's been a misunderstanding. This is a licensed child care facility, and you're interfering with a legal operation. Mr. Morrison, we have warrants for your arrest on charges of human trafficking, conspiracy to commit murder, and racketeering." Morrison smiled. "Agent Martinez, I think you'll find that those warrants are no longer valid. Judge Harrison signed an injunction this evening suspending all federal actions against my organization pending a review of jurisdictional issues." I watched Agent Martinez's face change as she realized what Morrison was saying. The network's corruption reached so high that they could manipulate the legal system in real time. "However," Morrison continued, "Mrs. Rutherford here has committed several serious crimes tonight: breaking and entering, destruction of property, theft of valuable assets." He gestured toward Emma and Tommy. "I'm afraid she'll need to be detained." "Those children are not assets," Agent Martinez said, her hand moving to her weapon. "They're victims of kidnapping. Agent Martinez, I have legal custody documents for every child in this facility, signed by parents, approved by social services, validated by family courts. Everything is completely legitimate. But I knew something Morrison didn't know. During my time in his office, I had discovered that Dr. Chen had been doing more than just gathering evidence. She had been systematically documenting every forged document, every bribed official, every illegal transaction. And she had been working with someone inside Morrison's own organization. "Morrison," I said, stepping forward despite Agent Martinez's gesture for me to stay back. "You're right about one thing. Someone here has committed serious crimes tonight." Morrison looked at me with amusement. "Mrs. Rutherford, you're hardly in a position to be making accusations." "You're absolutely right. I'm not the one making accusations." I pulled out my phone and played a recording that Dr. Chen had given me. Morrison's own voice from a meeting earlier that week. "The Singapore buyers are paying premium rates because they want the children for medical experimentation. The younger ones will be used for organ harvesting. The older ones for labor until they're no longer useful, then disposed of." Morrison's calm facade cracked for the first time. "That recording is fabricated, completely inadmissible." "Maybe in court," I said, "but not in the court of public opinion." I had already uploaded the recording to social media platforms, news outlets, and federal databases before entering the compound. By now, Morrison's own words were spreading across the internet faster than he could contain them. But Morrison recovered quickly. "Even if that recording were legitimate, it proves nothing, and it certainly doesn't change your situation tonight." That's when Janet stepped forward, and for a moment, I thought she was going to defend Morrison. Instead, she pulled out a gun and pointed it directly at him. "Actually, Charles, I think Mrs. Rutherford is right. Someone here has committed serious crimes." The silence that followed was deafening, except for the continued wailing of alarms and the sound of water dripping from the ceiling. Morrison stared at Janet in complete shock. "Janet, what are you doing? What I should have done 20 years ago when you first forced me to participate in eliminating a father." Janet's voice was steady, but I could see tears streaming down her face. "Charles, do you remember what you told me when I was 16 and tried to refuse my first assignment? You said that some people are born to be predators, and others are born to be prey. You said I could choose which one I wanted to be." Morrison's face had gone pale. "Janet, think about what you're doing. Think about everything we've built together. I have been thinking about it. For years. Every night when I try to sleep, I think about every child I helped you steal, every father I helped you eliminate, every family I helped you destroy. Janet's gun never wavered from Morrison's chest. Marianne, get the children out of here. Agent Martinez, arrest everyone in this room except Mrs. Rutherford and the children. Janet, Morrison said, his voice losing its calm for the first time. You can't do this. You know too much. If you betray me, you'll spend the rest of your life in prison. Charles, I've already spent the last 30 years in prison. The only difference is that this prison didn't have bars. Agent Martinez was moving to arrest Morrison's men when suddenly Morrison lunged toward Emma and Tommy. In that split second, I realized he was desperate enough to use my grandchildren as human shields, but Janet was faster. The sound of her gun firing echoed through the cafeteria, and Morrison collapsed to the floor, clutching his shoulder. That was for every child you've destroyed, Janet said, her voice breaking. And this is for my sister, who deserved a better family than the monster I became. She turned the gun toward herself, but I moved faster than I thought possible for a 67-year-old woman. I tackled my sister, knocking the weapon from her hands as we both crashed to the wet floor. Janet, no! I screamed. You saved them! You saved all of them! We lay there on the flooded cafeteria floor, Janet sobbing in my arms like the little girl she had been before Morrison's network stole her childhood and twisted her into something she never wanted to become. Marianne, I'm so sorry, she whispered. I wanted to protect you from all of this, but I didn't know how. I've been planning this for months, working with Dr. Chen, gathering evidence, waiting for the right moment to bring him down. You've been working with Dr. Chen? For 2 years, ever since I realized that Morrison was planning to expand operations into your area. I couldn't let him destroy your family the way he destroyed mine. Agent Martinez was arresting Morrison's men while paramedics attended to Morrison himself. Dr. Chen appeared with a group of federal agents, all of them working to coordinate the evacuation of all 43 children who had been held in the compound. As I watched Emma and Tommy being checked by paramedics, scared but physically unharmed, I realized that the network that had seemed so powerful, so untouchable, had been brought down by the very people it had tried to destroy. Janet had spent 30 years being forced to be a predator, but in the end, she had chosen to protect the innocent. Dr. Chen had worked within the system to gather the evidence needed to destroy it, and I had discovered that a grandmother's love could transform a quiet librarian into someone capable of fighting monsters. But Morrison, even wounded and under arrest, looked at me with eyes that held no remorse, no recognition of the evil he had perpetrated. Mrs. Rutherford, he said as the paramedics prepared to transport him, you think you've won something tonight, but this operation spans multiple countries, involves hundreds of people. Destroying one facility changes nothing. Maybe, I replied, helping Janet to her feet. But it changes everything for these 43 children. And sometimes, that's enough to start changing the world. As we walked out of that compound with Emma and Tommy safe in my arms, I knew that the quiet life I had lived for 67 years was over forever. But I also knew that some transformations are worth the price. The war against the network wasn't over. But tonight, love had defeated evil, and 43 children were going home. 3 months later, I sat in a federal courthouse watching as the last of Morrison's network faced sentencing. The investigation that had started with David's hidden recordings had expanded into the largest human trafficking case in United States history. Over 200 arrests had been made across 15 states and 6 countries. But the victory felt hollow as I watched family after family learn the truth about what had happened to their loved ones. Parents discovering that their children's deaths hadn't been accidents. Grandparents realizing that grandchildren they thought had moved away with surviving parents had actually been sold into slavery. The scope of the devastation was almost incomprehensible. Janet sat beside me in the courtroom, wearing an orange jumpsuit and shackles. Despite her cooperation with federal authorities, despite the evidence that she had been coerced into the network as a child, despite her ultimate betrayal of Morrison that had saved dozens of lives, she was still facing 25 years in prison. The defendant, Janet Rutherford, the judge said, has provided substantial assistance to law enforcement in dismantling one of the most sophisticated criminal organizations in modern history. However, the court cannot ignore that she participated in numerous felonies over a 30-year period, including conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, and human trafficking. I squeezed Janet's hand as the judge continued. We had spent hours talking during her detention, and I finally understood the full horror of what she had endured. Kidnapped at age 12 from a shopping mall, she had been raised within Morrison's network, systematically broken down and rebuilt into someone who could participate in unthinkable acts while believing she had no choice. However, the judge continued, the court also recognizes that Ms. Rutherford was herself a victim of this network from childhood, and that her cooperation has been instrumental in saving lives and bringing perpetrators to justice. The court sentences Janet Rutherford to 15 years in federal prison, with the possibility of parole in 8 years. Janet looked at me with tears in her eyes. Marianne, I know it doesn't change anything, but I need you to know that every day for the past 30 years, I thought about the sister I used to be. I never stopped missing her. Janet, she's still there. She's the person who saved those children. She's the person who chose love over fear in the end. Emma and Tommy, who had been staying with me since the raid, had slowly begun to heal from their trauma. They were in therapy, attending a new school, and gradually learning to trust the world again. But they still had nightmares, still jumped at unexpected sounds, still asked me every morning if they were really safe. Dr. Chen, who had received a commendation from the FBI for her undercover work, had become a close friend and advisor as we navigated the children's recovery. She had also become something else, a bridge to understanding the international scope of what we had uncovered. Marianne, she had told me just last week, the network Morrison was running was just one branch of a much larger organization. We've identified similar operations in 12 countries. The investigation is far from over. Agent Martinez had kept me informed about the broader investigation. The evidence I had gathered from Morrison's computers, combined with Dr. Chen's 2 years of documentation and Janet's insider knowledge, had revealed connections to trafficking operations spanning continents. But it was the testimony of the children that had ultimately sealed the convictions. 43 kids had been rescued from the compound that night. But the investigation had led to the recovery of over 200 additional children from facilities across the country. Each child's story had added another piece to the puzzle of how extensive and organized the network had been. The Singapore buyer who had been at the compound that night turned out to be part of an international ring that specialized in purchasing children for wealthy clients who wanted to own human beings without the legal complications of legitimate adoption. His arrest had led to raids in 7 countries and the rescue of hundreds more children. Charles Morrison himself had been sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Even from his hospital bed, where he was recovering from the gunshot wound Janet had given him, he had continued to claim that his operation was legitimate and that the children had been better off in his care than with their dysfunctional families. But it was the smaller victories that meant the most to me. Tommy had started laughing again, really laughing, not the careful sound he had made when he first came to live with me. Emma had begun talking about her father without crying, sharing happy memories instead of just trauma, and I had discovered something about myself that I never expected. The quiet librarian who had spent her life following rules and avoiding conflict had been transformed into someone who understood that sometimes love requires courage, and courage sometimes requires breaking unjust laws. The children weren't the only ones who needed to heal. I had started seeing a therapist myself, trying to process the reality that my son had been murdered, that my sister had been stolen from our family decades before I ever realized it, and that I had killed people. Morrison's men who had tried to prevent the children's escape hadn't all survived the chaos I had unleashed that night. Mrs. Rutherford, my therapist had said during our last session, you need to forgive yourself for the choices you made. You saved lives. You protected innocent children. The fact that you feel guilt about the violence that occurred shows that you haven't lost your humanity despite everything you've been through. But forgiveness was harder than fighting criminals had been. Every night, I dreamed about the moment I had triggered that EMP device, knowing that it would create chaos that might result in people getting hurt. I had made a choice to value the lives of children over the lives of their captors, and while I knew it was the right choice, it was a burden I would carry forever. The courtroom began to empty as Morrison's sentencing concluded. Life without parole for him, various sentences for his accomplices, and the beginning of a new phase of international investigation that would continue for years. As we prepared to leave, Agent Martinez approached me one final time. "Mrs. Rutherford, I wanted you to know that the task force has been asked to consult on similar cases in other countries. We're going to need civilian advisors who understand how these networks operate from the inside." "Agent Martinez, are you offering me a job?" "I'm offering you a chance to keep fighting, to use what you've learned to help other families who are going through what you went through." I looked at Emma and Tommy, who were waiting for me by the courthouse doors. They needed stability, normalcy, a grandmother who could help them rebuild their lives without the constant reminder of the evil they had survived. But I also thought about all the other children still trapped in networks we hadn't discovered yet, all the other families who might be targeted, all the other mothers and fathers who might die, never knowing that their children were in danger. "Agent Martinez, I'll think about it. But right now, I have 2 grandchildren who need me to just be their grandmother for a while." As we drove home that day, Emma asked me a question that broke my heart and gave me hope at the same time. "Grandma, do you think Daddy would be proud of us?" I pulled over to the side of the road and turned to look at both of them, these beautiful, brave children who had survived unthinkable trauma and were still capable of love, still capable of hope. "Emma, your daddy spent his last weeks trying to protect you and Tommy. He died fighting to keep you safe. What do you think he would say about the fact that you took care of your little brother through everything that happened? What do you think he would say about Tommy being brave enough to trust people again?" Emma was quiet for a moment. "I think he would say that we're stronger than the bad people thought we were." "I think you're absolutely right." As we drove the rest of the way home, I realized that the most important victory wasn't the arrests or the convictions or the dismantling of Morrison's network. The most important victory was sitting in my back seat. 2 children who had been through hell and come out the other side with their capacity for love intact. The quiet librarian was gone forever, but in her place was someone who understood that protecting innocence sometimes requires confronting evil, and that the most powerful force in the world isn't money or manipulation or fear. It's love. And love, I had learned, can transform anyone into a warrior when the stakes are high enough. 1 year later, I stood in the kitchen of our new home, watching Emma help Tommy with his homework at the kitchen table. The house was smaller than the one David had provided for his family, but it was ours, free from the memories of that terrible time, filled with the simple sounds of children learning to be children again. Emma was 8 now, and while she still had moments when the shadows of her trauma surfaced, she had also developed a strength and compassion that amazed me every day. She had started a program at her school to help other children who had experienced loss, and her teacher said she had a gift for making scared kids feel safe. Tommy, now 5, had fewer conscious memories of what had happened, but he still slept with a nightlight and insisted on checking the locks on all the doors before bedtime. His therapist said this was normal, that children process trauma differently, and that the most important thing was that he felt secure in his daily life. And mostly, he did. He had made friends at kindergarten, loved playing soccer, and had recently announced that he wanted to be a police officer when he grew up, so I can help other kids like Agent Martinez helped us. The legal proceedings had finally concluded. Morrison had died in prison 6 months ago, officially from a heart attack, though rumor suggested that even in maximum security, there were people who didn't appreciate men who trafficked children. I felt no grief for his passing, only relief that he could never hurt another child. Janet had been transferred to a minimum security facility after providing testimony that helped convict trafficking networks in 3 additional countries. We exchanged letters regularly, and she had started working with a program that helped other survivors of childhood trafficking. Her letters were full of regret, but also hope. Hope that she could spend whatever years she had left trying to undo some of the damage she had been forced to participate in. "The strangest thing," she had written in her last letter, "is that for the first time in 30 years, I feel like myself again. Not the person Morrison created, not the identity I had to maintain, but the sister who used to braid your hair and dream about becoming a teacher. Prison is terrible, Marianne, but it's also freedom from the life I was forced to live. Agent Martinez had kept her promise to stay in touch. The International Task Force had rescued over 800 children in the past year, dismantling trafficking networks on 4 continents. The evidence I had helped gather had become the foundation for new protocols that law enforcement agencies worldwide now use to identify and infiltrate similar operations. But the work was far from over. For every network they shut down, new ones emerged. The demand for trafficked children seemed inexhaustible, fed by wealthy buyers who treated human beings as commodities to be purchased and discarded. Mrs. Rutherford, Agent Martinez had told me during her last visit, we need people who understand how these networks think, how they operate, people who can spot the signs that ordinary citizens miss. The offer to consult with the task force is still open. I had been tempted. The quiet librarian in me had been replaced by someone who understood evil intimately and wanted to fight it. But every time I considered accepting, I looked at Emma and Tommy and remembered that they needed a grandmother, not a warrior. Though sometimes I wondered if those 2 roles were more compatible than I had originally thought. Dr. Chen had become a frequent visitor to our home. She and Emma had developed a special bond, 2 survivors who understood each other's journey from victim to victor. Lisa had left her position at the task force and opened a private practice specializing in helping trafficked children readjust to normal life. The most important thing, she had told me, is that Emma and Tommy learn to trust their own judgment again. Children who have been manipulated by adults often struggle to believe in their own perceptions. Your job isn't to shield them from every difficulty. It's to help them develop the confidence to recognize danger and the skills to protect themselves. It was advice I tried to follow, though my protective instincts sometimes overwhelmed my better judgment. When Emma wanted to walk to school with friends, when Tommy wanted to have a sleepover at a classmate's house, when either of them showed interest in activities that would take them away from my direct supervision, I had to fight the urge to say no. But slowly, carefully, I was learning to let them be children again, to trust that the world, while still containing evil, also contained enough good people to make normal childhood experiences possible. The financial settlement from David's life insurance policy had finally been processed. Sarah's criminal convictions had voided her claim to the money, and it now provided security for Emma and Tommy's future, college funds, a trust that would ensure they never had to worry about basic needs, resources for continued therapy as long as they needed it. I had also used part of the settlement to establish a foundation in David's name, dedicated to helping families identify signs of trafficking operations and providing resources for survivors. The foundation worked closely with Agent Martinez's task force, but focused on prevention and support rather than direct law enforcement. Sometimes, late at night when the children were asleep, I would sit in my living room and try to reconcile the woman I had become with the woman I had been just over a year ago. The transformation still felt surreal, from quiet librarian to someone who had broken into criminal compounds, disabled security systems, and helped bring down an international trafficking network. But the strangest part wasn't what I had done. It was how natural it had felt once I accepted that protecting the innocent sometimes requires extraordinary measures. My phone buzzed with a text message, pulling me from my reflections. It was from Marcus Webb, who had become something like family to us over the past year. Marianne, saw the news about the trafficking ring they busted in Phoenix. Looks like they used the same methods your investigation helped identify. 3 families saved because of the protocols you helped develop. Thought you should know. I smiled as I read the message. This was what made the transformation worthwhile. Not the dramatic moments of confrontation and rescue, but the quiet knowledge that our experience was helping protect other families from experiencing similar trauma. Emma looked up from her homework. Grandma, what's making you smile? Just thinking about how proud I am of you and Tommy, and how proud your daddy would be. Do you think he knows about everything that happened? It was a question she asked periodically, and I always gave her the same answer. I think your daddy's love is so strong that nothing could stop it from reaching you. I think he knows that you're safe, that you're loved, and that you're growing up to be exactly the kind of person he hoped you would become. Tommy looked up from his coloring book. Grandma, will you tell us the story about how you saved us? It was a ritual he had developed. asking me to tell the story of our rescue, but edited for a 5-year-old's understanding. In his version, I was a superhero grandmother who had used special powers to defeat the bad guys and bring him and Emma home. Once upon a time, I began, settling into the familiar rhythm of the story. There was a grandmother who loved her grandchildren so much that when they were in trouble, she discovered she had superpowers she never knew existed. As I told the story, I looked around our small, safe kitchen and marveled at how normal our life had become. Homework and bedtime stories, soccer practice and school plays, the ordinary rhythms of family life that most people take for granted. But I also noticed things that the old Marianne would never have seen. The way the mailman seemed to linger too long at our neighbor's house, the unfamiliar car that had driven through our neighborhood twice in the past week, the new family down the street whose story about moving from another state had small inconsistencies. Probably nothing, almost certainly nothing. But my awareness had been permanently heightened. My ability to detect potential threats forever changed by what we had experienced. After I tucked the children into bed, I sat at my computer and opened an email from Agent Martinez. It contained a case file from a trafficking investigation in Seattle. A widowed father with 2 young children who had recently married a woman with an unusually clean financial history. "Marianne," the email read, "we're seeing patterns that match the Morrison Network's methods. Different people, but same techniques. Could you review this file and let me know if anything seems familiar?" I studied the documents, noting the careful way the new wife had isolated the father from his extended family, the gradual changes to his financial accounts, the increasing dependence on her for childcare and household management. It was too familiar, too similar to what Sarah had done to David. I picked up my phone and dialed Agent Martinez's number. "Agent Martinez, it's Marianne Rutherford. About that Seattle case, when do you need me there? If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe, leave your like, and share it with someone special who needs to hear what I lived through. This is a space of love and respect, and every day there's a different story of strong, courageous women who never gave up. Because sometimes, love requires us to become more than we ever thought possible. And sometimes, the most ordinary people are capable of extraordinary courage when the people they love are in danger." The quiet librarian was gone forever, but in her place stood someone who would never stop fighting for the innocent, never stop watching for signs of danger, and never stop believing that love is stronger than evil. Even when evil wears familiar faces, even when it hides behind legitimate institutions, even when it seems too powerful to defeat, love finds a way. Love always finds a way.